So this lesson's going to seem a lot like yesterday's lesson, and that's because it's a lot like yesterday's lesson. I find that objects don't go over really well the first time, and so a second time and a third time is really helpful to iron out a lot of the problems. One of the other things I'd like to make clear is that I call these kinds of objects that we're studying right now baby objects because they're going to follow a very tight series of rules so that you're able to build them kind of by rote. We're going to build more complicated objects. We're going to build stacks and queues, I think even next week. And those you'll see are much more complicated and don't follow quite, they're not quite as formulaic. So in Java, you can make your own variable types, and what we call that is an object. So instead of having just one variable, what we can do is we can group a whole bunch of variables together in one unit. And in addition to that data, or the variables, we're also going to associate in the methods that use the variables and work with them. So for example, you might have a car which has some attributes or some variables or some instance variables, and you're going to have a series of methods, some accessors and mutators that allow you to do things. And we group those together in a class. The class is like a template or a type, and then what we can do is we can create a series of variables that are that class or that are that type. And you can use your template a whole bunch of times. This is very similar to when we had JText fields or text views now. So we would have a text view class, and then we could have a whole series of text views on our screen. So here's the example of the class that I would like to use today. So it is a class of an item, and our item is something that you would buy in a store. So it's going to have a price and a name. And then I want to go through how the template for these baby objects that allow us to build one in this format. So the first thing we're going to do is we begin off our class and we pick a name. We have a capital, and this one's going to be item. And then we're going to choose our instance variables for our class. And in this case, I'm going to have these two instance variables. I'm going to make them private for reasons that I don't want to explain yet, but I'm going to make them private. Okay, then we are going to start with the constructors. So we're going to have two constructors. We're going to have a default constructor, and that's one where we're going to assign in our own values into the instance variables, and we're going to have another one with parameters so that the programmers who are using our class to make their own variables can assign stuff in. So the default, I'm going to pick something for my price instance variable and for my name instance variable. And then in the other one, I'm going to have two parameters that come in that are the correct types. So P is going to go into price and N is going to go into num, and then I'm going to assign each of them in. Okay, so when constructors are very special, they have no return types, and that's because the thing that they're going to return is themselves. So in this case, this item constructor returns an item. So the fact that that it's returning its own self is why it doesn't have a return type. When we call them, we are going to be using the word new and the class name. And so for example, right down here where we have item shoe equals new item, this right here is the constructor call. And the constructor call that we're calling in the first one isn't the default one that I've shown you on the screen here. It's the one where we could pass in a price and a name. The second one is the one that I'm showing you on the screen here. So we've got item shirt equals new item. And this is calling this constructor that we're looking at right here. Okay, so no return type, same name as the class, and when we call them with the keyword new. So a mutator is going to be used to change memory, and we're going to have one for each instance variable. So because we had a price instance variable and a name instance variable, that's what we've got here. We're going to make them void because they don't return anything. The whole point of a mutator is to get a value so that we can store it in our instance variable. So here we're going to get P and store it in price, and here we're going to get N and store it in name. So accessors are going to allow us to get what's in those instance variables. So we need one for each instance variable and a ToString method. So here we've got getPrice, where we're going to get the price, and getName, where we're going to get the name. And you have to make sure that the types match the types of the instance variables. So a price was a double, so I'm going to return a double. And name was a string, so I'm going to return a string. The ToString method I didn't talk about yesterday. It's kind of a cool little method. It's called as a default thing, so if I was just to call the variable's name, ToString gets automatically called on it. But ToString's purpose is to kind of convert all of the data inside the object into something that's useful that kind of makes a sentence. So in this case, I'm going to write the flip-flop costs $4. And so that's going to be in a nice little sentence format to just print on the screen. And that's ToString. Okay. So another new thing is equals. So I hope that you kind of remember from the string unit we learned dot equals. And dot equals was going to test if two strings were equal. And I want you to think of the A as being the thing that is the instance variables that are in the class that we're using. So A is the instance variables that happen to be there. And B is going to be the one that's coming in from the outside. So when you're making an equals thing, you have to have a parameter passed in that is the same type as the class, and that is recursive. But we're going to have an item, I'm going to call it I, and it's going to be passed into my items equals method. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get I's name, and I'm also going to get I's price. And then I'm going to take my parameter's name and my parameter's price, and I'm going to see if it's the same as the instance variables within the class. So I'm going to see if get name equals name, and if get price equals price. And if those two pieces of information are equal, then it means that indeed the item that was passed in is the same as the item that is inside the class, and so we should return true. Otherwise, we should return false. So let's try another one of these. So let's say my class name is oog, and I have two instance variables, snick and slack, and I want to make the equals method for this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to get another, I have an oog of my own, and I want a new oog coming in. So I'm going to get that to come in. I'm going to call it O. So I'm going to be comparing O's snick and slack to my own snick and slack. Blah, blah, blah. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get O's snick, and I'm going to compare it to my own. And then I'm going to get O's slack, and I'm going to compare it to my own. And if O's snick and O's slack equal my snick and my slack, I'm going to return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return false. Okay, let's take a look at CompareTo. So if you'll remember, CompareTo is a bit more complicated, and I didn't go hardcore into this, but I said that what we were going to do when we did this, when we did CompareTo, is I urged you to write it out like this. So you had the thing that was calling it kit, and then you put the sign in, and then kitten, and you determined if it was true or false or what was going on. So what's actually happening a bit more is it's actually going to be going, so CompareTo actually returns a value less than 0 if the first one is smaller. It returns a value greater than 0 if the first one is bigger, and it returns a value of 0 if they're equal. So on your sheet, there's a series of questions about this. So let's take a look at it. So we've got app.compareTo peach. So then the first value is app, and that's kind of the value that's that things are being called on. And app's actual value is apple. And then it's being compared to peach, and I wrote that out there. There wasn't a variable like down here that I need to translate. It's just peach. So if you take a look at those two, apple and peach, it turns out that apple is less than peach. So then we should circle for its relation, we should circle the less than sign. Okay, so because apple is less than peach, it's going to compare, when I have that, I have this situation. So what CompareTo is going to return is -1. So if the first one is less than the second one, we return -1. If the first one is equal to the second one, we return 0. If the first one is greater than the second one, we return 1. Okay? And so that's what you're working on this sheet, is to see whether CompareTo is going to return a 0, a -1, or a 1. First fill in the first value, then fill in the second value, then figure out the relation, then figure out the CompareTo. Okay, so when we're coding it, it's similar to equals, but there's a bit of change. So again, we're going to get another item that's coming in, and we're going to be comparing that to ourselves, to our own price. This is going to be returning an integer because we're going to return -1, 0, or 1. So I'm going to take I's price, and if I is the outsider, compares to my own value and it's bigger, that means that I'm smaller than it, so I'm going to return a -1. If I's price is equal to my price, then I'm going to return a 0. And otherwise, the reverse is true. So that means that I is going to be smaller than me. So I'm bigger. So I'm going to return a 1. Okay. and that's how CompareTo works. The thing about CompareTo as well to notice is that it's always on the basis of something. So you're going to always be comparing on the basis of price in this instance. So here's the complete class again that you would need to make a basic, fully functioning kind of baby object about an item. So in Android Studio, what you're going to do is you're going to find the folder that has your main activity in it or your Java file, and then you right click on that one and you choose to create a new class. And when you're creating a new class, the first thing you have to pick is the name. You can't change it once you create it, so be very careful to make it capitalized and everything is spelled correctly, no spaces, that sort of thing. Once you've created it, you'll see that it appears here. So here's the item class. And then what I can do is I can put in all of my item code that we've been talking about in the class listed down in order. Then it actually doesn't run because the class can't run in and of itself. So what you need to do is you need to make another class. I'm going to use my main activity to actually run it. So I've made a text view. And here's a text view, and it makes a giant box so I can shove a bunch of stuff out on the screen. I'm going to use it kind of like a system.out.println. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a set of code in here where you can see where I'm making an item, and then I'm making another item, and then I'm calling a bunch of the methods that I've created. And so this is going to harken back to the item class, and it's going to run the two of them together to make my code run on the screen. So if we take a look at that, here's the stuff that was in the show method. So first I've got item shoe equals new item. So that's going to call the second constructor. And it's going to put in this price and flip-flops. And then I've got item shirt equals new item. So that's going to call this constructor. And so I'm going to have a t-shirt at that price. And then I have a series of things that I'm doing on the screen to run the methods that are in my object class. The other video has more tracing of how to trace these things back and forth. Okay, good luck on your sheet.